You are now tuned in to Damn Good Advice, a podcast where we bring you the cream of the crop in finance, relationship, and all-around life information from special guests. Remember to share this podcast, and if you're listening on YouTube, go ahead and like and subscribe while you're at it. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Damn Good Advice. Today I'm joined by Sam Aureli from MITIMCo. I'll start off by letting Sam tell you a little bit about himself.
Well, first, thank you for having me. I'm, believe it or not, humbled that you would even consider having me on the podcast. MITIMCo is the MIT investment management company. We manage the endowment and the investments associated with the endowment. And part of that is real estate development.
Yes.
And I work for the real estate department, and our focus on real estate is here at Kendall Square, in the heart of Kendall Square. I've never considered myself someone that had anything meaningful to say. I have a lot to say. I don't know how much of it is meaningful, but we'll certainly find out soon enough.
Well, it's a pleasure having you here.
Thank you. I just turned 51, July 31st.
What? Are you serious? Happy late birthday. I didn't know.
I know I don't look 51. I look more like I'm in my late 20s, early 30s. Ignore the salt and pepper in the beard and the bald spot on the back of my head. Back in the day when I used to attend church, we'd always pick on each other. But every once in a while, I'd get a text. With someone sending me a picture of what the back of my head looks like in the event that I had forgotten about it. So
just a friendly reminder that you're balding. Male pattern baldness is
it's one of those things where I have two young adult children, and I've told them I trust them when the time comes where it just makes sense to start either buzzing my hair or shaving it. Please let me know. I'm leaving it up to the two of you to tell. No one else is going to tell me whether my hair is good or not. It's up to you.
How have they done?
So far, so good. They say, no, you're okay. Every year we do a spot check.
A spot check.
But no, I just turned 51, and it's strange when I think of myself as an immigrant, because the reality is I am an immigrant. I was born in Italy. We left when I was 2 years old. There were no opportunities. This was back in 73. My mom was pregnant with number 4 at the age of 19 years old. So she had her first child at 14.
Was that common, or is that?
People ask that and think, well, in Italy, it must be something that is common, something that you see all the time. But even then, it was still unusual. The funny thing is, my dad had to seek out permission from the local carabinieri, which, the local police force department. Technically, you had to be 14 to get married. And my mom was 13.
Oh, wow.
So, and for some reason, he was able to convince them. So we left when I was 2. And he couldn't, his original plan was to come to the U.S. Couldn't get the visa. Wow. Apparently, there were already too many Italians in the country. And I don't know if it still happens today. It'd actually be something that'd be interesting to look into. But back in the day, they used to cap. So we ended up in Australia. Sydney, Australia, and we were there for 6 years. We had a decent life in Australia.
I was going to say, what was that experience like growing up in Australia?
I mean, I was young, and we finally got comfortable in Australia. After 6 years, my dad takes the family, and we end up in the U.S. And I'm telling this background because I think it's part of what has shaped me over the years. Because we jumped around from country to country. I didn't have a high school education. Because I left Italy halfway through my 3rd year out of 5 years. When I was 21, my ex-wife had said, hey, why don't you look at some other programs that they have available? And architecture was it. And I said, well, let me get into it. And I had to get my GED.
Oh, wow.
Took some classes and then, passed the GED. And that allowed me to enter the evening program at Wentworth Institute of Technology.
Incredible.
And started going to school at night. I had the first child. I'm working full-time because I'm the sole provider of the family. And I'm working 60 hours a week, going to school 2 to 3 nights a week.
Jeez, please.
For me, I just felt that was normal. I wanted to be an architect.
That end goal, looking at what you wanted to achieve, is that what kept you going? Because you were stretching yourself pretty thin.
I had to provide for the family. That was first and foremost. I kept on pushing myself. It's what I thought I had to do. I never thought I'd be where I'm at now.
Which is where?
MIT.
Absolutely. Your backstory to me is just absolutely incredible. It's fascinating and motivating. So here on Damn Good Advice, we like to kick things off with one essential question. And so that question is, reflecting on your life, what's the best damn advice you could give yourself?
One piece of advice that I've noticed I give a lot to people, especially my kids growing up,
Right.
is that for the most part, you won't be judged because of the mistakes you make in general. It all depends on the mistakes sometimes. But in general,
Right.
our biggest struggle is not making mistakes in life.
For sure.
Me as a father, I will never judge you because of a mistake that you made. However, I will judge you how you respond to that. Don't hide from it. Raise your hand and say, hey, I screwed up.
Own it.
Own it. I like that. From a professional standpoint, I remember working on a project where I came in, it was probably a third of the way through, and we had a financial problem. We're talking about a $10 million problem.
Oh, geez.
The person in charge of the project was afraid to tell their superior
Yeah.
because of how it would be perceived. But it was kept quiet until towards the end of the project.
Yeah.
There were times when I wanted to slip a piece of paper in an envelope, anonymous envelope, and just deliver it one early morning and put it on the guy's desk and say,
Expose their ass.
Expose, it's like a whistleblower. So for me, that was difficult to keep quiet. And I remember sitting down one day with this person's superior.
Yeah.
I remember him telling me, Sam, never lie about the problems you have. Always be upfront about it. And if you have a problem, talk about it, because the sooner you talk about it,
Yeah.
the sooner we can start thinking about how to fix it. And the person was fired.
Yeah.
Because rather than spending the next year and a half working on a solution, the owner of the company had to write a $12 million check.
That's an expensive mistake. That's a lovely example of having a problem, knowing that you have a problem, but choosing not to address that. One of my quotes, it's a quote that I made up, but it's don't complain about a problem unless you plan to fix it.
And then tell me how you're going to make it right. And maybe you don't have the resources to fix it. Get help. One thing that colleagues have said about me is that they've appreciated my honesty and the fact that I don't talk bullshit. And in some cases, while people are arguing who's at fault,
Yeah.
even if it's not my fault, I have no problem raising my hand and saying, hey, look, fine, I'll take the blame. Can we now focus on finding out how to fix it? The reality is, once you come up with a solution, what are you going to complain about, I guess? I don't know.
Yeah. What's next? It's too easy to solve problems.
And going back to what you just said, don't complain about a problem unless you intend to be part of the fix.
Yes.
Yeah. And for me, it's always been fine. You have these grandiose ideas. What are you personally doing to help the situation other than complain about it?
Right.
And I think we need to do more of that. Think introspectively. And before we start criticizing the billionaires in this world and why they have so much money, with what you've been given or what you have, what are you doing with it? Because if you're unwilling to part with a single dollar, I guarantee you're not going to want to part with $1 million if you're able to.
You got it.
I think generosity and the desire to help is something that has nothing to do with money. And generosity doesn't always have to be about money. Generosity can be spending time with people. Generosity can be listening. Generosity can be doing something anonymous.
Yeah, I completely agree.
It's those little things that we can have a huge impact within our bubble. And I think if we focus on that and more people focus on their individual bubbles, our bubbles intersect in some way.
Yeah. Then we get to this point where if enough bubbles intersect, then you get a large bubble that starts to make a difference on a larger scale, right? That's interesting. I like the bubble analogy. It's really cool.
I have to coin it.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll get that coined for you. The Aureli method. Let's pivot a little bit and talk about what you like most about what you do.
I'm a problem solver.
Yeah.
I actually get bored when there aren't problems to solve, which is, I don't know if that's a good thing. Because I think it goes back to being so active, like always being busy.
Right.
Never having time to just settle in and think about my life. It's like it was a constant race.
And so that never left you. It's still within you for sure.
I think it's starting to dissipate. I think when I hit 50, I realized, holy crap, I want to retire one day.
Yeah.
And 65 seems like a good number, I've got 15 years. I'm like, I need to figure this out.
Yeah.
It took me a while to slow down because when I graduated, I didn't say, oh, look at all this free time. I'm going to spend more time with the family, or I'm going to, do more things that I love to do. It's no, the time I dedicated to school, I just added it to work, or I added it to church.
Yeah.
And I had a difficult time saying no when things needed to be done. It was a problem. It was an obsession. And I eventually evolved into a workaholic. I think in the end, we make time for the things that mean most to us. At the time for me, my career was most important.
Right.
So I did whatever I needed to do. So for me, problem solving, it's what excited me about construction.
Yeah. Well, working, I'm sorry, if I may,
No.
Working as hard as you were, how hard was it to manage your family as a father? How was that impact?
It definitely had an impact, and we'll eventually get to what my regrets are.
Yeah.
It definitely had an impact because, especially in the construction management industry, it's not something that you just come home, shut off, and flip the I'm home switch.
Right.
I didn't come home and say, okay, let's go. It's
Right.
like, I need a half hour to decompress. I need to just chill out. I was never that type of person where I need to have dinner on the table when I get home. It's like, no, that's the last thing I want to do is eat at that moment. So that made it difficult because now I'm eating separately from the family.
Yeah.
Because again, if you're unable to shut your mind off from the day's activities, you're not really giving your best to whoever you're spending time with.
Yeah.
So then that was the kids. I'm thankful I have a good relationship with my kids.
Well, that's awesome.
And it didn't, because I think the older I got and the older they got, things started to change. I developed a lot more patience, and I also learned how to manage that work-life balance. But it was a struggle for a time, shutting that off and realizing I don't have to work 12 hours a day. And I don't need to do a side job.
Right. You no longer needed to.
I didn't need to.
Yeah.
It was just a mental block and something that I had to work through.
So I'm assuming you did have a paradigm shift at some point. You started to work a little less.
Maybe working smarter, I think.
Okay.
But it was also, I don't need to drive myself crazy.
Yeah.
And this idea of perfection.
Yeah.
Which comes from my dad.
It sounds like you were largely influenced by your dad in a lot of your decisions.
Yeah, there's a lot of good and bad there. Something like perfection, you would figure that's something good, but I believe you do everything in moderation. Seeking perfection in moderation is useful because you want to do things right. And my dad was always someone that you did things right. But he was also someone that, hey, Dad, look what I did. And he's like, yeah, and? I expect you to do that. It was never, hey, I'm proud of you for what you did.
Yeah, that's tough.
It was only our failures that were recognized, never our successes.
Right.
My youngest child, oh God, he was, I think, junior high school, and he did something. I forget what it was. But I said, you know what? I'm proud of you. He goes, Dad, I think that's the first time you've ever said that. I think at that point it hit me. Because I'm like, holy crap, I don't want to be my father. That just opened my eyes.
Yeah, it resonated.
Yeah, I need to do something differently.
If you don't mind sharing, what would you say your biggest life regret is?
It's one of those things where, if you were to go back in time and always say, don't change anything, don't do anything different, but you have to go grab this one book. And I say book because I'm looking at a bookshelf.
Right.
But whatever key or whatever, and bring it back to the present, but don't make sure you don't see anyone, don't change anything, don't do anything differently.
Yeah.
Just grab that and come back. And I always look at regrets very similar, because if I go back and change one thing that I regret, would I eventually be where I am at today? Because I kind of like where I'm at today.
Yeah.
Did things go perfectly? No. Was it difficult? Hell yeah. Was part of that my fault? Yeah, absolutely. I'm partly responsible for the difficulties in my life, but I try not to look back. I remember, buying a 2-family house in Malden back in 97.
Yeah.
And selling it 2 years later because I had to move to New York City. When I got back from New York 6 years later,
yeah,
it was worth over $500,000.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Yeah, that's why I don't like looking back.
At the end of every episode, we like to wrap it up by asking our guests if there's a special quote from your life that sticks out most to you that you would love to share with the listeners today.
I have horrible memory. And I've been reading the Bible on and off my entire life. And if someone were to tell me, hey, what's your favorite Bible quote? I wouldn't be able to quote it because I've never been someone who can memorize things. I write everything down.
Right.
So I worked for William A. Barry & Son back in the day. One does stick out. And I remember it being in the CEO's office. It was a framed quote by Mark Twain.
Oh, okay.
If you tell the truth, you never have to remember anything. I think that's the quote. And for someone who has poor memory,
Yeah.
I think that's why it just makes sense to tell the truth because, I would probably get myself into trouble if I had to remember how to lie.
That's good. That's a lovely quote. It's good. It ties in very nicely with what we've been speaking about. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode of Damn Good Advice. I'm your host, JD Lewis. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe if you're tuned in on YouTube.